Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to go over comparing and contrasting my Viper to my Mustang. I was going to do this video outside. Unfortunately, the weather hasn't been cooperating the last few days, so I'm just going to use the models and just talk about the differences between both cars. I did a couple of videos with each one. I did my ownership experience. So now I'm just going to compare and contrast the two. Since they're both performance cars, we'll start off with the power. Both cars were underrated from the factory, are probably about 30 to 40 horsepower. Unsurprisingly, the Viper is noticeably faster. It probably has about 80 or so more horsepower, and probably at least that in torque. The Viper being a two-valve engine and large displacement, the torque is just noticeably different between the two cars. It is instantly responsive, whereas the Mustang, it does have pretty good low-end torque, but it being a smaller displacement and a four-valve motor, it takes a little bit more time to build power. Usually around 3,500 RPMs of power starts to noticeably pick up, but both cars are pretty powerful and pretty fast. The transmission and the clutch, they're both Tremec T56 6-speed manual transmissions. They're both a little notchy when they're cold. That's a very common characteristic of Tremec transmissions. They both have single plate clutches. They're both fairly easy to modulate and drive, like if you're stuck in stop-and-go traffic or you're doing more city driving. The Viper is a little bit less effort to drive because it has a hydraulic clutch, whereas the Mustang is a mechanical clutch. But it doesn't take that much effort. Your leg isn't sore after driving them for a while, so for pretty high-performance cars, the clutches really are not bad at all. And as far as steering and suspension, the Viper, the steering is a little bit more precise. I think the Mustang just had a standard steering shaft in it, so it has a tiny bit more play. But overall, it is very precise. It is very responsive. One interesting characteristic about the Mustang is, because it had really wide tires on it for that era Mustang, the turning radius is really bad in that car. You pretty much have to make a K-turn whenever you're turning around in anything but a fairly large parking lot. So that's a pretty interesting characteristic with that having a Cobra R specific steering rack on it. And then as far as the suspension, the Viper being an ACR, the suspension is a little bit stiff for street use. The Mustang is pretty good. Both suspensions are very compliant. You can throw the cars into corner at pretty considerable speeds, and they both react very well. So overall, suspension is really good on both cars. I prefer the Mustang suspension a little bit more. I like it better for street use. Whereas the Viper would probably be better under optimal track conditions. I've never raced either car. I probably never will. So I'll never have them under track conditions. They'll both be under street use. And then the brakes. Each car has almost identical brakes. They both have 13-inch rotors with Brembo 4-piston calipers in the front. The Viper brakes are a little bit bigger in the back. By today's standards, they're nothing crazy or big, but in the early 2000s, they were pretty cutting edge. For street use, they're fine. You can do high-speed stops. There's no issue with fading. If you're going to race either car, it would probably be a good idea to put bigger brakes on them. But under street use, you're never going to get fade out of these brakes. So, as far as the interior ergonomics of both cars, they're both pretty good. The Viper is a little bit tighter, more claustrophobic than the Mustang would be. A tall person can drive either car. The Mustang, the seat goes back a little bit more. I think it has a little bit more headroom, whereas the Viper, the pedals will go further forward. So someone who's over 6 feet can comfortably drive each car. And then the Viper, there are seat lowering kits available. So if you have someone who's very tall, but it's pretty good as far as people of any size being able to drive the car. But the Viper is a little bit tighter. And the only thing ergonomically that's not that great in either car is the shifter. With the Cobra R, the shifter sits kind of far forward, so your arm's kind of stretched out when you're shifting forward. And the Viper, because the transmission tunnel sits so tall, and the seat is kind of low, and the shifter is very high, your arm kind of sits like this if you have your hand on the top of the shifter. So either car is not terrible, but they're not perfect. They probably could have made either car a little bit better. Both cars have very comfortable seats. I personally like the Cobra R seats a little bit better. They're a little bit more supportive, and I prefer cloth, whereas the Viper seats, they're leather, but the leather is very soft. It is a relatively comfortable seat overall. The interior build quality is not the best in either car. The fitment is good, but they're kind of cheap on the inside. This generation of American cars are known for being kind of cheap plasticky interiors. I don't care. It doesn't bother me at all. I think the interiors are fine. They're both laid out very simple, and they're nice. And then as far as daily usability for each car, I wouldn't recommend either car for daily use unless you're really willing to compromise a lot to have a car like this for daily driving use. The cars, believe it or not, by today's standards, are actually about the same size as a compact car. The Viper is, I drive a compact car as my daily, and the Viper is actually 7 inches shorter than my compact daily driven car. So most people, when they look at it, they think it's this really big, wide, huge car. It is kind of wide, but it's really not that long. And then the Mustang's about the same size lengthwise as my my daily car, and they're both a little bit wider. The Cobra R is a little bit less usable, being no air conditioning and no stereo system. So I can't tell you how many times when I drive that thing, I go over to push the stereo just subconsciously. The Viper having the comfort group in it being an ACR, it's got the AC and the stereo, so it's a little bit more user friendly for kind of just driving around. More kind of daily-ish usage, not that you really would. Neither car, especially being older, have any modern amenities in it. There's no Bluetooth or automatic climate controls or electric anything in them. So they don't have that sort of modern characteristics that a more normal modern car would have in them. The fuel economy is pretty terrible in both cars. The Viper's like low teens, the Mustang's like mid-teens, so it's pretty obvious these cars really are not built to be economical at all. The ground clearance is pretty low on both cars. If you take the splitter off the Cobra R, it's about the height of a normal car, so getting around is really not a problem. The Viper only has about 5 inches of ground clearance, so you can get over speed bumps and driveway inclines. You just have to go slow and at an angle, but usually you don't have an issue unless it's really an extreme angle. And then the Viper, the hood is so long, you kind of have to do this if you're pulling into like a parking spot or something like a tighter space. So you just kind of have to be careful since like 2/3 of the car is in front of you, the way you sit in the car. Then as far as storage in the cars, not that you would really use them for running around, but you could run errands in either car. If you were maybe at a car show coming back and like, oh, I got to stop and grab something at this store real quick. Both cars have a surprising amount of space. Most people aren't surprised about that with the Mustang, since you can put stuff behind the seats where the other back seats would normally be, and then the trunk's fairly large. The Viper, though, actually has a lot of space in the back. You can get a surprising amount of stuff in the back of a Viper GTS. There's quite a bit of room back there. I took it to the supermarket one time, and I got a lot of stuff in the back of that thing, so you could definitely take it somewhere to put stuff in the back. As far as the reactions to the cars, I talked about this in my Cobra R video a little bit. The Viper gets a lot of the general reactions. You get the thumbs up, you get the waves, you get the cell phones out the window. Because it is such an exotic-looking car, most people will stop and at least kind of glance at it at a car show. You get the stereotypical stop at the gas station and look at it and ask you about it. That's common with the Viper. With the Cobra R, you don't get that. Because it has really a normal Mustang body, most people don't know what it is. They really just dismiss it. They don't pay attention to it. No, they don't walk up at the gas station. They're not really waving at you when you drive unless they're a Mustang enthusiast. But the people who are true car enthusiasts that really know what this thing is, they really go nuts when they see it, because it is such a low production car and such a rare car that they really are just amazed to see one in person. They come up and they ask you a million questions about it, and it's really a fun experience, really in either car with the reactions. But this gets a lot more general reactions, whereas this doesn't. As far as maintenance on both cars, since they're American cars, it's really just fluids and filters is the only thing you're really doing to either car. It's nothing exotic. You're not doing anything like you would do with a foreign car. You're not doing belt services or engine out services or stuff like that. It's fluids and filters and follow the maintenance schedule, and that's it. It's like working on any normal car. Nothing crazy. You can do it yourself. You don't got to run to an exotic car dealer or an exotic car repair place or anything like that. As long as you get the cars off the ground, you can work on either car yourself. It's easy to get on. Easy to get at. I've worked on both of these cars myself. Very simple, very easy to get to. Standard, normal tools. Cost to own is what you would expect to spend on a normal car. There's nothing crazy to buy on either car. The Cobra R having a lot of one-off parts. If something happened to one of those one-off parts, that could potentially be an issue. And the Viper, being the body panels are very exotic. They can be expensive, but you can buy parts from parted out Vipers if you needed a body part. So it's not too bad. Since they're American cars, it's not really that hard to find the parts. and you don't have to go to like an exotic place to get fluids for them, or you don't have to, you know, have some place in Europe mail you parts for, like you have to do with a lot of exotic cars. And as far as what makes each car unique, the Viper is obviously the looks. I mean, it looks like nothing else. It's so unique looking. You're basically getting exotic car looks for what is a relatively cheap price. So that's what I really love about that car. It's so unique and so exotic looking, but you're not spending a fortune on it. And the power in this car, the torque is just unbelievable, especially for an older car like this. It really throws you back in the seat. It just feels amazing. The torque is like nothing else. Maybe something compared to something nowadays, but for something this old, the torque is just awesome, and it feels so cool in this car. Whereas the Cobra R, the car is very mechanical, meaning a lot of people are very quick to talk about a high-performance street car and call it a race car. But anybody who knows anything about cars knows there is a huge difference between a true race car and a high-performance street car. You know, everything from the big stuff to the power to the little things like the little bushings and, you know, how precise and tight it feels. Driving a race car on the street would be absolutely brutal. It would be terrible to drive in the streets, and you wouldn't want to do that. Whereas high-performance street cars, they soften the cars enough where they might still be a little harsh, but you can drive them on the street without it being a terrible experience. But the Cobra R, having stiffer bushings in it and having like a firm short throw shifter, is a very mechanical feel. You feel the transmission disengage and engage each cog. You really feel the road through the suspension. It's very compliant. So they definitely went more towards the realm of race car over high-performance street car. So I really like that about this car. I also like the fact that it's basically a factory hot rod. A lot of people that are into Mustangs really would always like to really hot rod them out, do a lot of high-performance parts, put a lot of money into it, but then you got to worry about putting everything together. Are all the parts going to work together? With this car, it's hot rodded from the factory. It's done right. The Ford engineers did it. Everything works together. The car works great. And all the stuff you would want to modify in a Mustang are already done in this car. You don't need to touch anything. It's a great car from the factory. Unfortunately, the car doesn't really get a lot of the attention that it deserves because it is just a normal Mustang body. But when people start to really look into it, they realize how unique this car is and how everything is modified and how hot-rodded it is, that it really is a true custom car from the factory, and it is amazing to drive. Would I recommend either car? Absolutely. It really depends on what type of car you're looking for. If you're looking for something more flashy and exotic, I might recommend the Viper more. If you're looking for something more rare and one-off, I'd probably recommend the Cobra R. Prices are very similar on either car. They're both in about the $40,000 range, give or take. But if you are into this era of car, you like a very analog driver's car where you're in control. There's really no driver's aid. You got ABS in either car, but really that's it. If you like something maybe more modern and you like the computer controls, I would recommend something different. But if you like this era of car where everything's up to you, a computer doesn't jump in at every error you make, I would definitely recommend either car. It's a great feel. If you're someone who really likes to focus on driving and really leave the decision making up to you instead of a computer, I would definitely recommend you look at either car. Do your homework, investigate each car. They are both absolutely amazing cars to drive. Even though, you know, the Viper is a little bit more powerful, the Mustang is definitely unique in its own right, and it has its own special characteristics that the Viper doesn't have. They are both, even though they were competitors, and one did something better than the other one in each individual performance category, both great cars. Check them both out. They're amazing. You would not be disappointed to own or drive either car. Thanks for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed.